Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon, and I'm with SIPA, your Colorado government authority, helping you get more information and services online and offering Colorado government's grant funding. In today's webinar, we're going to hear from CapTech on the countdown to compliance, essential steps to meet accessibility requirements on July 1st and beyond. Before we get started, please go ahead and turn on captioning if you need or desire, and note that during the webinar you are muted. If you have questions or would like to communicate with the presenters at any point during the webinar, please use the chat or the Q&A function. We'll unmute people who raise their hands at the end for any remaining questions. We'll also have poll questions for you to answer during the presentation quickly and a post-webinar survey, and we hope you will provide your feedback. Please join me in welcoming our speakers, co-Sherrod, Virginia Booth, Matt Leahy, and Mary Fran Wiley with CapTech. Thank you all for your time and this incredibly timely presentation. Also on the call is SIPA's Sales and Marketing Director, Beth Justice, and Customer Success Director, Dwayne Tucker, if you have any questions for us. Thank you again for joining us today. And with that, I turn it over to our guests.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you all for being here today. My name's co-Sherrod, and I'm from CapTech Consulting. We're really excited to talk about this topic. And I want to thank our friends with Colorado SIPA for welcoming us back. This is our second webinar on accessibility, a topic we're really passionate about. Hopefully the information that we share today will help you put together an effective accessibility plan and successfully meet the upcoming HB 211110 deadline. So I'll quickly introduce the team here with me today, and everyone will kind of reintroduce themselves as we go. Again, my name's co-Sherrod. I lead CapTech's public services delivery here in Colorado. While I don't consider myself an accessibility expert, this is an area of passion for me because I see the difference that we make in delivering inclusive services here to my friends and neighbors in Colorado, and I'm lucky to work with great partners who are experts in this space. I'm joined by Virginia Booth. She's a leader in our customer experience practice and a user experience architect with a passion for incorporating accessibility into the design and development process. Matt Leahy, he leads our CapTech's accessibility service offering. He's an inclusive design leader with a background spanning both UX and UI design as well as front-end development. And last but not least, Mary Fran Wiley. She's an inclusive design manager with over 15 years in customer experience and experience design, infusing inclusive design and accessibility in every step of the product design lifecycle. And also to briefly introduce CapTech, if you're not familiar with us, CapTech is a full services consulting firm partnering with clients across the public and private sectors. We provide comprehensive design and development services with a passion for digital accessibility. In everything we do, we strive to deliver inclusive, accessible experiences, and that experience incorporating accessibility into web and digital content and all the systems that we build, that's the experience that we've brought to our customer partnerships through SIPA. We have the broad experience to help organizations assess their accessibility position, understand what they need to do in content, design, development, quality assurance, and build real strategies for remediation, and then incorporate accessibility into your product life cycles, web strategies, and operations. I think you know this, but there are only 14 weeks remaining before the July 1 deadline of HB 211110. I think you know that. It's one of the reasons why you're here today. But while there are immediate actions that you should start working on, and we're going to talk about all those, I do encourage you to remember that July 1 compliance isn't the destination, it's the beginning. In the next 14 weeks, you're going to complete audits, have a remediation plan, and start addressing your critical issues. But this is going to be a part of your forever design, development, and operations processes. So think about not just how you're going to meet the near-term requirement, but how are you going to prioritize accessibility in your organization, set up your teams and technologies for long-term success? And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Leahy.
Mary Fran's going to lead us through the first section.
Sorry.
Here. Yep.
All right. So we're going to start talking about an accessibility audit and getting that planned. And we're going to start with a quick poll question. And that is, what accessibility standard do you need to meet to comply with HB 21-1110? We have a few choices here. Let us know which one you think it is. This is not meant to be a gotcha question. It really is meant to just make sure everybody's on the same page here.
And your choices are 2.0A, 2.1A, 2.1AA, or 2.2 AAA. And I'll end this in just a couple more seconds. All right, there we are.
Uh-oh. I cannot see the results.
Sorry, forgot
There
to
we
click
are.
the button.
Okay. No, that's okay. I was worried it was on my end. I'm very glad that most of you are spot on. The law does require 2.1 AA compliance. So you're right on with what is required. But I want to take a quick look just at what that means. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that's the WCAG that we just talked about. This is an international set of standards published by the W3C. And these guidelines are the most legally mandated accessibility standard. They're mandated here in Colorado, but they're also the standard that's referenced in many other legal decisions and laws, both nationally and internationally. However, we do recommend that you follow 2.2 AA conformance. 2.2 came out after the law was written in Colorado. And all it does is it adds a couple more criteria and takes away one that's a little bit outdated. So as you're doing your audits, we highly recommend that you do 2.2 AA because you will already include 2.1, and that lift for that extra modernization is really minimal when it comes down to it. There are, so next we're going to talk about sort of how you get to your audit. So in the accessibility testing process, there's really 3 steps. You start with some discovery and planning, like any good project. So meet with stakeholders and all of your doers to review any existing documentation, understand that full breadth of functionality, as well as technology development and content authoring workflows. From there, you move into the actual meat of the testing. So this is where you do that automated and manual testing, and you work closely with your development teams. And then the last bit is the issue logging. So once the testing is completed, preparing some documentation so that you can actually move into the next piece, which is what Matt will cover once we're done with this section. So for that, planning your audit, there's a few things you need. We're going to cover. So people, process, and tools. People wise, you need to make sure you have an accessibility SME. And I hate myself for using that term, but you do need somebody who is an expert in accessibility standards, or a team member who's really willing to learn and dig in, because these are really complicated technical standards that somebody needs to evaluate your content against. You also need to identify any other responsible parties. So this is the team members responsible for creating and managing content, any internal stakeholders, any technology owners, and any development leads. So anybody who's going to have to either do evaluation or implement changes found in that evaluation. That should also include third-party vendors who would be impacted by the results. So agencies or tools that you have implemented who will need to go back and make changes to their code. You should identify all of those people as well. Process-wise, just confirm if WCAG conformance is sufficient or if any other standards or requirements also apply. For example, section 508. Good news, 508 and WCAG, if you're compliant with one, you're compliant with the other. But just it's important to note what standards apply to you as an organization. What is your evaluation scope? So what screens and files are you looking at for a representative sample of your content? And your technology stack. So what platform, browser, and screen reader combinations you'll evaluate. And then last but not least, tools. So what audit tools are you going to use? So any automated or guided testing tools, logging tools, how are you tracking what all of those issues are and communicating them out once you've found them? And then also making sure you have all of the right hardware, right? You need to look at different operating systems. So you at least need 2 different computers, and then any additional mobile devices or assistive technology that you would need, you should also identify in your planning stage. From there, just want to talk briefly about how much you need to test. So it isn't necessary to test every page on your site or every single document, but you do need to test enough to have a full representation of the content and functionality on your site. So what does that mean? Anything that's critical. So if it's contact information, online databases, form submissions, those all should be included in your audit. You should also look at your site analytics and pull the most frequently accessed pages or documents. These might not be critical content and functionality, but they are things that people are looking at and referencing a lot. So those should be included. When you're looking at web content, you should make sure that you're looking at all content types and functional components. So this means like that if you have an interactive calendar, if you have a blog, that you have like a calendar event and a blog post. If you have several different page templates, that you have included at least one example of each of those templates, and that all sort of widgets or design system elements that are available on your site are included on at least one of the pages you're testing. You should also make sure that you're looking at any multimedia content as well. So making sure you have a representative sample of images, videos, and audio files that might be on your site. And then last but not least, rounding it out with a randomly selected sample of pages. This is just to make sure that you're not cherry picking with some unrecognized internal bias, and making sure that maybe some pages that don't get a lot of love are included. But again, it doesn't have to be every page and every document. You should be able to find sort of those recurring problems with a representative sample. Once you have your sample identified, you're going to move into testing. And so we have another poll question, and it is, what types of accessibility testing have you completed for your website? Have you done none at all? Have you done automated scans, or have you done automated scans and manual testing? I'm very curious to see sort of where everybody nets out on this one, because I feel a lot of people are familiar with automated testing because it's something that has a relatively low barrier to entry. And so I'm crossing my fingers that no one is responding none at this point. Hopefully you all have at least a little bit of familiarity with some accessibility testing going into this.
All right, there are our results.
All right. For those of you who haven't done any testing, it's time to get started. I'm actually really impressed that so many have done automated scans and manual testing. That's really important, and we'll get into that in a bit. But at least, what is that? Over 80% of you have done at least some sort of testing, and that's awesome. Really excited to hear that. I want to start with talking about the automated testing, so I talked about this a little bit during the poll question. We have two types of testing. Automated testing, this is using tools, usually a browser plugin that can scan for common and programmatically determinable issues that need to be manually reviewed for accuracy. And then manual testing, which is identifying issues that can't be determined by evaluating the code alone and really need that human intervention. When it comes to automated testing, this is using a scan usually built into your browser or a plugin, and it's just going to go through and look at the raw code. So, and a lot of those tools that do that testing also offer some guided manual tests, so it can get you started on that journey as well. And the reason we do automated testing is because this gives us sort of a quick and easy way to identify and flag many accessibility issues that might be otherwise time-consuming or difficult to check. Automated testing can provide you with a general idea of the quality of the experience. If you're seeing a ton of automated issues, it's safe to say that there's a lot going on. If you have a relatively small number of issues found in automated testing, that's great, but it doesn't tell you the overall quality of the experience. The nice thing is this also helps streamline some issue discoverability for the programmatically determinable issues. And some of these tools even provide you with potential fixes. So because some issues are so common, they will even recommend ways to improve your code so that you don't have to work as hard, which is wonderful. Work smarter, not harder. Just some notes about automated testing tools is that there are, if we can, oh, okay. So we recommend, basically you need automated testing tools are a little bit different for websites and documents. So for websites, these are going to be your browser plugins, things like Site Improve, Axe DevTools, Accessibility Insights, and Wave are all things you can install in Chrome. And then when you're looking at documents that you might be hosting on your website, you actually need a totally different set of tools to test. Microsoft Office has those built in. Google Docs doesn't, so Grackle is a plugin that can help you there. And then if you have any PDFs, Adobe ActPrep Pro does have automated scanning built in. It's just a couple things to remember with automated test results. They are not 100% accurate. They will find false fails. They will miss things that fail. So they only identify fewer than 50% of potential issues. So they're a really good start. But they are not the final say on whether or not your site is accessible. And that's where the next type of testing comes in, which is our manual testing. This is where we find the issues that scans can't find, and the ones that require human input to determine. This is things like keyboard testing, where you navigate using only a keyboard, screen reader testing, where you listen to the site being read out loud with a screen reader and try to navigate through the content, and things like the reflow and resizing requirements. So is it still legible if you increase the zoom and make your text bigger? This is going to find the issues that automated testing misses, even among the types of issues that automated testing is meant to find. For example, color contrast over an image isn't always identified by an automated scanning tool. And it's the only way to test screen reader experience. There's no sort of automated way to do that. And that expert insight that comes from doing that manual review will help you understand that full experience rather than just sort of looking at the code in a vacuum. It really lets you see how that experience is coming to life for different groups of users. Big note here is that testing should include at least 2 screen readers. VoiceOver, which is the one on Mac, and it is built in native on Mac devices. It's great. I think it's everyone's favorite. It is the most common screen reader used on mobile as well. However, it is actually so much better than some of the other ones that there's things that it sort of interprets in the code. So you need to make sure that you're also looking at one of the ones on a PC, and those are NVDA and JAWS. You can choose either one of those. They both work fairly similarly. The difference for them really is their licensing requirements and their cost. But functionality wise, they really do work very similarly. We have a couple of common browser pairings. So like VoiceOver and Safari, Apple's designed those to work really well together. And then on PCs, NVDA and Chrome or Firefox, and then JAWS with either Chrome or Edge. And you want to make sure that you're testing at least 2 combinations. So the VoiceOver in Safari and NVDA in Chrome, or VoiceOver in Safari and JAWS in Chrome, right? You just need to pick 2. You don't have to test every screen reader in every potential browser. You will find all the issues you need just doing 2 of those combinations. And then the last bit of your audit is compiling issues. And this is actually, I think, one of the most critical steps, because this is where you translate what went wrong into what needs to change. This is how you communicate with your developers. and any other stakeholders. So it should be in a standardized format, like a spreadsheet, or entered into a ticketing system like Jira. It needs to be written clearly so that development stakeholders can understand what the fix is. But they also need to understand what the problem is in case they have an alternative fix or a more efficient code fix. You should also be inclusive of screenshots or screen recordings of issues for clarity. I found a lot of times just typing about an issue doesn't fully communicate what the failure is. And then lastly, you should organize it with related issues grouped together. It's really helpful when that happens for a developer because they can sometimes identify one fix that will fix 3 or 4 things rather than 4 separate fixes. Things that need to be included for each of your issues are a description. So what is the issue and what criteria was violated and how is it impacting users? So what is going wrong? But then also a description of how it should work. What needs to change to ensure that accessibility? Who's responsible for that fix? And really letting the person who receives this log know what should be changing. The severity of the issue. So is it making it completely unusable for certain groups? Is it just annoying and requires a navigation workaround? Is it blocking critical content, or is it just blocking like a nice visual element? So how severe is that issue? And then the impact of that issue. Is it something that's part of your global nav? Well, that's a high impact issue, even if it's a relatively minor one. So looking at sort of that impact that issue is having on the overall experience is really important to note, so that when you move into your remediation planning, you're ready to go. And that is where I hand it off to Matt.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary Fran. So now that we have a good understanding of what we need to do to assess our websites and uncover some of those accessibility issues, we want to talk now about how we can make a plan to tackle those issues and get them fixed. So it's important to realize that you're not going to address all of your issues overnight. Some of these issues are going to be really straightforward. Some are going to be a lot more challenging to fix. So we need to prioritize where we dedicate our efforts now and where we can focus later. We want to consider several factors when prioritizing accessibility issues that are going to influence the risk that you incur as an organization, the impact to your users, and the remediation process and what that's going to look like. If you followed Mary Fran's guidance, you should have a lot of these noted in your issue log already that you can reference when you're prioritizing. So first are violations of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. These are issues that can be proven most objectively, which means they represent higher risk and should be given higher priority. You want to start with level A. Those are typically your most foundational, critical issues to address, followed by level AA. Next, you want to look at the severity of that issue. As Mary Fran explained, some issues are going to be full blockers. They're going to prevent access entirely for certain user groups, while others might negatively impact the experience to varying degrees, but can be worked around in some way by the user. Those full blockers should be prioritized over other issues. Then you need to consider the scope of the issue or what it's impacting. An issue that impacts a global element, like Mary Fran mentioned, your website navigation, or essential functionality like a registration form or a contact form. Those issues are going to affect a lot more users in more critical ways than issues that are isolated in their scope. And finally, you want to take into account what it's going to require to address each issue so that you can plan accordingly. We're going to talk more about level of effort in just a few minutes. But before we move on, I want to make sure I clarify one point about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are an incredibly helpful tool. They're a really valuable and necessary benchmark to drive compliance. But it's also important to remember that the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are only a baseline. They're a passing grade, essentially, and they don't cover every accessibility barrier that might exist on your website. What the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines really aim to address are the most prevalent and most objectively measurable accessibility issues, but it doesn't fully address many other areas, things like the readability of your content, your font selections, those sorts of things, not reflected in WCAG, the overall usability of your site, accessibility considerations for neurodivergent users, features of native mobile applications, and then conversational tech like chatbots, just a few examples of areas that aren't fully addressed by WCAG. And so when you're thinking about prioritization, while those web content accessibility guidelines are certainly a very important consideration, they aren't the only consideration. And you still want to assess these issues that you're seeing in terms of their impact on your users. So let's return to our discussion about prioritizing issues. We talked about some of those general factors to consider, but I think it might be helpful for everybody to take a look at how those might apply to some very common issues that you might encounter in your own audits. So I'm going to describe to you now 3 issues one by one. For each one, I'm going to ask you to give me your best guess as to the level of priority that you would give to that issue. We'll just use the chat to do that. So when I show you the first issue, just put your answer in the chat. We're going to use a simple scale of critical, high, medium, or low. So here's the first issue I want you to think about. Drop-down menus in your main website navigation can only be operated by hovering with a mouse. What do we think the priority of that issue might be? I see a low, I see a critical, I see highs, good mix of highs and criticals for the most part. Yeah, I think you guys are spot on. So if we reference back to some of those criteria we looked at, first of all, this is a clear WCAG violation. 2.1.1 keyboard requires very directly that all functionality on your site can be operated using only a keyboard. And the severity of this is very high. Something that's not operable with keyboard really does not have a workaround for non-mouse users. So any of these types of users, somebody that's operating with interacting with keyboard, using a screen reader, relying on voice commands, and potentially even touchscreen users aren't going to have a workaround and aren't going to be able to access content that's based on a hover interaction. And then the type of component or functionality this is impacting is global in scope. It's on every page of your website, and it's a really essential navigational feature. So all of that adds up to make this a pretty critical issue to address. Okay, here's the next issue that I want you to think about. On your About page on your website, your heading levels jump from level 1 to level 4. I see medium, medium. I see a low, a high, medium, medium, medium. Okay, lots of mediums. So this is one I would probably categorize as low. And I'll explain why here. First of all, heading levels aren't explicitly a WCAG violation. Marking headings as such is required by WCAG, but things like skipping heading levels or getting the heading level incorrect is a little bit outside the scope of WCAG, but definitely a best practice. And the severity of this is relatively low. As long as headings are still tagged appropriately and you don't have bigger issues other than just skipping a couple of levels, the impact on users is relatively minimal. They're still going to be able to access those headings, use those headings to navigate through the document, and all of those sorts of things. And then lastly, to contrast this with the previous issue, the impact of this issue is very isolated. It's only on one website page, and it's a page that has what I would say is not essential content or functionality. So all of that combined, I'd probably give this a low rating. And here's our last issue. We have a screenshot, let's say it's of a form or an interface on a tutorial or help page in your website, and that screenshot is missing alternate text. What sort of priority would you give to this issue? I see some mediums, I see some highs. Yeah, you all are spot on with this one. So I put this one as medium for right now. I think this is one that definitely could venture into high territory as well. Let's look at some of those criteria. So this is a WCAG violation. An image or any other sort of non-text content, according to 1.1.1 non-text content, is required to have alternate text that can be read by assistive technology like screen readers. Now the severity is where, maybe there's a little bit of variance here. So there is no workaround for screen reader users here. If an image doesn't have alternate text, there is no workaround. Some screen readers like VoiceOver will attempt to read text that's in an image, but I'd say that functionality is not very reliable and is not something that you as a website owner should rely on. But the severity, I think, depends on the importance of the image and the information it conveys. So if that is a critical image that's representing information that's not present in the text, we might actually boost this to high. If it's more complementary to the text, maybe medium is the severity that we would assign to this issue. And then again, contrasting this with that website navigation issue, the impact of this is isolated. It's not probably more important content than that about page, but still isolated to a specific page and not impacting users across the entire site and probably not impacting the volume of users that something like your website navigation would. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, just in terms of thinking about how, even though, we would love to address all of these issues, they all differ in their impact and in how we might think about prioritizing them. So once we've prioritized our list of issues, we need to make an actionable and realistic plan. And in order to do that, we need to know what it's going to take to fix those issues. Chances are you have a lot of different individuals and groups that play a role in creating and maintaining the digital content on your website. So you're going to need to work with those groups on accessibility remediation. For each issue in your backlog, you need to identify who's best positioned to address each type of issue. So you might have issues that are related to the overall design, theming, layout, or functionality of your website. Those sorts of issues probably need to be addressed by a development team, potentially working side by side with a design team that has access to the code base and can fix those sorts of issues that affect the overall website experience. Issues that are specifically related to text and media content on your site and potentially documents that are hosted on your website as well probably fall under the purview of your content authors. And a lot of these issues are going to be things that you can address directly through your content management system or CMS if you have access to that. And then lastly, you very likely are going to have content or functionality on your website that's supplied by a third-party vendor. And any issues related to those third-party content or other components are going to need to be handled by that vendor. You're going to have to work with that vendor to address those accessibility issues. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about third-party content, but first I want to ask you all another poll question here. Are any of you leveraging third-party content or functionality on your website today? And simple answers, yes, no, or I don't know.
I love seeing the answers come in fast and furious. We'll give it a few more seconds and then we will share the results.
Right. So I see the majority say yes, and that's not surprising. I think the majority of websites do pull functionality and have integrations and embedded content from a variety of places. And I see a number of folks that said, I don't know. And that's a totally fair answer as well. So for those folks that said, I don't know, let's talk a little bit more about what we mean by third-party content. So when we talk about third-party content, this is any content or functionality that you or your team do not directly create or manage as the website owner. So this may come from tools or services that are integrated or embedded into your website, or in some cases directly published by citizens or other outside parties. This could be a wide range of things. It could be the video player that you use to embed videos on your website. It could be a web form builder, a social media feed, or a calendar scheduling widget. What's important to understand here is that even if you don't directly control these elements and can't directly remediate issues with them, you are still ultimately responsible for ensuring that they're accessible. So after you've confirmed that you have that third-party content implemented correctly according to standards or directions provided by the vendor, you have some options to consider. First, you can talk directly to the vendor, report the issues that you're seeing, and ask them about remediation. Depending on the size of the vendor and the relationship you have with them, they might be eager to work with you on remediation, or this might be a longer process. If you determine that that third-party content is inaccessible and it's not going to be getting remediated anytime soon, you might consider looking for a new vendor that has better accessibility standards. And lastly, you can make a plan to provide accessible alternatives to third-party content or functionality. If you do that, consider preparing an EEAAP, an equally effective alternate access plan, to document this approach and how you're going to provide those alternatives. Given that remediating issues with third-party content is very likely going to involve multiple moving parts, the level of effort and timeline is likely going to be higher, which we're going to discuss a little bit more on the next slide. In the meantime, it's still important to document known issues with third-party content in your accessibility statement and any conformance documentation that you have. The W3C, who publishes the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, also provides some guidance on including what they call a statement of partial conformance for these sorts of scenarios. Okay, so knowing who you need to work with on each issue, the last thing you need to determine is the level of effort. In general, but particularly at this moment in time as we look ahead to the July 1st deadline, you really want to think about where you can have the greatest impact most quickly, and then make a plan to work through the rest of your backlog from there. It can help to think about this using a simple matrix where we look at priority and level of effort. So in the top left quadrant here are issues that are high priority and high impact, but relatively easy to address. These are those easy wins. So you want to prioritize addressing all or as many of these as possible prior to the July 1st deadline to get your website into the best possible shape. The earlier example of the navigation menu that only works on hover might fall into this category, though it might depend on the implementation and the input of your development team. In the bottom left quadrant here are issues that are medium to low priority, as well as lower effort. So once you've taken care of those easy wins, you want to determine how many of these incremental issues are achievable to fix by the deadline. Our other example issues from earlier, fixing alternate text or fixing heading levels, might fall into this category. So then as we look ahead past July 1st, I want to look at the top right quadrant here. So these are issues that are both high priority to address, really big impact, but they're also going to require a much higher level of effort. So these are things that might require a redesign or a rebuild effort, replacing old technology, replacing a vendor that's providing some of that third-party content, or other significant changes like that. Like Co said, we've got 14 weeks left before that July 1st deadline. You're unlikely to accomplish these changes prior to that date, but it's still important that you identify what the steps that you need to take are and document these in your organization's accessibility plan. And then after that July 1st deadline, you're probably still going to have a backlog of issues. And if you do, you're going to want to continue working through those, kind of working those around those major projects and the timelines that you're managing there. Lastly, you might have issues that are really difficult to fix, but relatively low and isolated impact. For these sorts of issues, it might not make sense to invest the effort and resources to fix them now. In these cases, you might consider just whether you can remove or replace the problematic content, or have a plan to provide accessible alternatives for users that need them. So let's summarize briefly and then talk about a couple of other important points. So as we've discussed, it's really important that you have a realistic and achievable plan for remediation. You're not going to fix all of your issues right now. You want to prioritize where you can most significantly benefit users and mitigate your risk, and then work with your team to determine what it's going to take to get it done. As you're working on your audit and remediation plan, you also want to be getting an accessibility statement published on your website. The statement might be simple at first before you've done your audit and put together your plan. It might just communicate your commitment to accessibility and provide a point of contact for users. But once you have a more concrete plan in place, you should update that statement to reflect your current status, talk about the goals and milestones that you're targeting, and what steps you're taking to achieve them. And then lastly, this is going to be a long-term commitment that extends past that July 1st deadline. So to create accountability for yourself and your organization and maintain support and excitement within your organization for these goals, it's helpful to commit to providing regular reporting on your progress within your teams and within your organization. Highlight the milestones you've achieved, and talk about any risks or barriers that require support. Right. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Virginia to talk about what we should be thinking about after July 1st.
Thanks, Matt. All right, so as Co mentioned earlier, July 1st is just a milestone. It is not the destination. And so if the next 14 weeks are focused on fixing those existing issues on your site, the bigger picture that we want to talk about here is around baking accessibility into your organization's ways of working so you can avoid creating those accessibility issues in the first place. Some of the key areas that you should be thinking about when you are considering the bigger picture include how to incorporate accessibility into your processes, what training or resources your teams will need, how you vet new technology to be used on your site, and how you can make accessibility checks a routine activity for your organization. So let's get into it. The first area we'll talk about here is incorporating accessibility into your processes. So likely that same stakeholder and responsible parties group that you just included in your audit planning, those are the same folks that are a great starting point to include when you're identifying the key processes, roles, and tools that will impact the accessibility of your digital experiences. You're going to want to analyze processes for those opportunities to incorporate accessibility along the way. One example would be if you have a quality assurance or QA process that you use before you launch a new article to your site, let's say, that's a great place to add any relevant accessibility checks to that list. You'll want to identify the roles that will hold that responsibility for sustaining accessibility throughout your evolving digital experiences. Generally, we're talking about those content authors here, but really anyone who's routinely touching your site. And you'll also want to determine who will be responsible and accountable for driving further progress towards greater accessibility. So like Matt mentioned before, WCAG is a great starting point, but it's just a baseline. And there's more you can do to push for more inclusive experiences. So who in your organization will be leading this charge? A couple specific examples that might be relevant to your organization. So one, again, that content authorship. So looking at the ways in which new content is determined, created, and published to your site. When it comes to feature enhancement or the implementation of new functionality that might be incorporated, you especially want to look at how you're testing that functionality before it goes live to make sure that it is conformant with WCAG and HB 21-1110. And then the accessibility contacts are another great area to consider here. So when you're providing contact information to the visitors of your site on how to report accessibility issues or seek assistance, you want to make sure that you're clear on what the processes are to handle some of those incoming inquiries. Next, we'll talk about providing training and resources for your team. So once you know what and who will be involved in let's say like the accessible evolution of your organization, you'll want to offer training and resources to set everyone on your team up for success. When it comes to training, we recommend starting with accessibility core concepts. Think about this as accessibility 101. So training that includes an overview of benefits and key considerations when it comes to accessibility that should be top of mind. This is a great training to offer to your entire organization. So even if folks don't directly touch any of your digital properties, having that baseline understanding of digital accessibility and that awareness of your organization's commitment to accessibility is helpful. But we also recommend identifying opportunities for more role-specific training. So one way that you can uncover this is by looking at that issue log from your audit. And as Mary Fran had recommended, pulling together some of those themes or groupings of related issues, that can be a great place to start to expose potential gaps in your team's skill set or where their focus is, and help you identify some targeted training that's tailored to your organization's needs. There are a lot of great and free resources out there that you can leverage. The first here that we're recommending is Colorado's OIT Guide to Accessible Web Services. That is a fantastic resource that has a lot of plain language explanations of the law and things that you can do to make sure that your experiences are conformant. The World Wide Web Consortium, their Web Accessibility Initiative has a fundamentals program that is provided for free as well. That is quite a mouthful, but if you search for W3C WAI fundamentals, you should be able to find it relatively easily. I saw someone mentioned WebAIM earlier on the call. WebAIM is one of our favorite organizations. They offer a ton of great resources. They also do a bit of surveying and research on the accessibility space and what are some of the trends in like device usage and things like that. So that is a great resource to check out. And then DQ University's on-demand courses. So DQ offers, again, a number of free resources, but they also have some paid courses as well that get into some more specific topics. And then when it comes to templates and resources, you'll want to identify where accessible friendly materials like templates might help your team, especially if they're completing any repeatable or common tasks. So for example, let's say that your organization holds a quarterly meeting, and after that meeting, you want to publish a PDF of the meeting minutes to your site. One way that you could approach this would be to create a PDF template for those meeting minutes that can be reused every quarter, and making sure that that template is set up so that when it's exported, it already has a baseline of WCAG conformance baked in. That's one way that you can help set your team up for success there. Another example would be if you have a brand color palette, you could determine which color combinations meet those needed contrast ratios and create a color palette reference sheet or cheat sheet for your content authors so that they have some guidance on what color combinations will work. And then, of course, an accessibility checklist for your teams to leverage is a great tool as well. Just a checklist of things that they should be considering before they publish any site updates. A third area for consideration is how you select the technology that's used for your site. And as we've discussed today, if the third-party tools that you're using on your site don't meet standards, you can still ultimately end up with an inaccessible experience and one that you're accountable for. So baking accessibility considerations into that procurement process can help avoid some unwanted scenarios down the road. When you're evaluating a new technology, first you'll want to look on the company's website or in your contract for any documentation of their accessibility support. If you can't find that accessibility documentation, then you can request an accessibility conformance report or ACR. A common format for the ACR is called the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template or VPAT. Sometimes you'll hear those terms used interchangeably, but the VPAT is a type of accessibility conformance report or ACR. And just a fair warning, ACRs can be quite dense and maybe a little overwhelming if you haven't encountered one before, but basically what you want to be looking for there are details on how the experience meets or does not meet each of the WCAG guidelines and corresponding notes to justify that assessment. Another thing you can do if you're able and you have this capability within your team is perform your own accessibility assessment of the technology to ensure that it meets your standards. And then if you're using a content management system or CMS solution, you can also ask if the platform meets the W3C's authoring tool accessibility guidelines, ATAG. So similar to the WCAG framework, the W3C also provides this ATAG framework to assess not only the accessibility of the CMS editing interface itself that your team members would be using, but also its ability to output accessible content for your website. And then a fourth way you can start incorporating accessibility into your bigger picture is by assessing your website on a regular basis. When you're first starting out, it's likely that that first accessibility audit will result in a list of remediation efforts that are needed to achieve initial baseline of compliance. And depending on the state and size of your site, it's not always the most fun experience to get that first issue log. However, once you have established a strong foundation and when you're incorporating best practices into your ways of working, those subsequent reviews should be much less eventful. If you're ensuring that all your site updates have appropriate accessibility checks up front, that allows you to catch any issues quickly and make smaller adjustments to course correct as needed. In between big site updates, you can also use a monitoring tool like Google Lighthouse or XMonitor or Site Improve that can help to identify issues as they arise. But we also recommend that at least once a year you perform a site-wide accessibility check to ensure that your holistic experience still meets your accessibility targets. So if you think about some of those incremental and ongoing checks as looking at different pieces of the puzzle, you'll want to put all those pieces together to make sure everything fits and works together as intended. That annual review is also a great trigger to update the accessibility statement that Matt was talking about. You want to make sure that you are keeping that up to date with your current status in terms of your site's compliance and compatibility with WCAG and any future plans that you have to address known issues. The last thing that I'll touch on here is just about mindset. So the bigger picture goal, it's not about complying with HB 21-1110. That is very important. So hear that. But caring for accessibility is really, it's one way that you can fulfill your mission as a civil servant, extending your digital experiences to more of your citizens and allowing them to participate in what your organization is offering. One of the many great things about accessibility is that it doesn't just benefit those with permanent disabilities. There's actually a whole host of other scenarios in which an accessible solution benefits a more diverse and broader audience. And so Microsoft's persona spectrum does a great job of depicting some of these ripple effects of creating with different abilities in mind. One example would be the audiobook. So the audiobook was originally created for blind readers, but it also comes in handy for someone whose sight might be temporarily impacted by cataracts, let's say, or for a driver who needs to keep their eyes on the road. Another example would be when you add captions to your video to support viewers who may have a hearing impairment. Those same captions can also help someone who's in a loud environment. It's March now, so maybe they're at an NCAA March Madness game, but they want to check in on some of your video content. Having those captions can help them follow along, even if they're in an environment that's too loud to hear the audio. It also works really well for someone who might be in a quiet setting, like in a library, and they forgot their headphones. Having those captions can help in those scenarios as well. Those are just two quick examples, but again and again, designs that are intended to help people with disabilities end up benefiting a much larger audience, which is really just one more reason to keep striving for accessibility to be business as usual. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Co to wrap this up.
All right. Thanks, Virginia. So to wrap up, first, we encourage you to, no matter what, get started. Execute an accessibility audit, understand the requirements, your scope, get the tools that you need, and start testing. Build that remediation plan that prioritizes your issue log based on severity, impact, and level of effort. You may not get to everything right away, so just make sure that you're getting done what's most important and ultimately what you can. And then finally, set a long-term goal. Work on your content design development pipeline. Figure out how to incorporate good accessibility practices so that you don't have to remediate as much. And then build the skills on your team and establish those right cadences to keep it going. So whether you're kicking off a new build or uploading minutes from your last public meeting, the best time to start incorporating accessibility into your process is now. And we hope that we provided you with valuable information that helps you meet your near-term and long-term goals. But if you do need help and would benefit getting your technology and your teams ready, SIPA has a number of really great vendors in this space, many with different specialties that they can help you with, including us. If you need help with accessible design and development, incorporating accessibility into your operations and training your teams, or conducting accessibility audits and building remediation plans and those long-term strategies, then we'd love to talk more. And so with that, we've saved a little bit of time, and I know that we're happy to wait around as long as Sharon allows us, and we can take questions.
And we did have a couple about third-party apps in there, and I don't know if anyone has additional questions after you did go over some of that.
Yeah, I can start with an answer to that because I saw that a very similar question in the chat as well. Couple folks asking about a separate third-party website that's linked to from your website. And I think it depends whether that's still a website that falls under your purview as an organization that you own, that's reflective of a service that you're providing to your constituents, or if it's just sort of an independent source of information that you're linking to. So I'll give you an example. We're working with the Department of the Treasury right now, and they have a couple of standalone websites, one for their unclaimed property program, one for interacting with investment professionals. And these are standalone websites with their own design, their own code base, and all of that. But they are, still owned by the Treasury essentially, and our services provided by the Treasury. So they are still accountable for the accessibility of those sites. But the remediation process is going to look different for those. What they're really going to be doing is working with the third-party vendors that manage those sites to provide accessibility conformance documentation, to pursue remediation and those sorts of things. Hope that answers the question.
And can you switch to the last slide? Cindy is needing our email addresses so she can get back to us with some questions because she's got to go. Thanks.
And then I did see a question in the chat from Lance about the standards applying to internal applications and digital information, and what that priority should be. I don't know, Matt, do you want to?
What's that? Do I want to talk about that?
Yes.
So the ADA does have a few different sections that cover public-facing services as well as internal tools and support for employees. The ADA and HB 211110 are, I think, primarily focused on your constituents, although you should aim to have an accessible environment overall, and all of those things ultimately should be part of your accessibility plan.
I think the thing I'd add here is that the internal tool is most likely covered under Section 508 for making sure that it's accessible for employees, which is slightly different than the requirements for the public-facing content. And did we miss any other ones?
I don't see any others. Sharon Shayla's asking again about getting a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yes. We'll get this up on our YouTube channel so you can rewatch it. We'll get captions added and transcripts. So it'll take us a little bit there, but we'll have it that way if you want to share it with anyone else or watch this again. And if you do want the PowerPoint presentation, you can just send a request over to anyone on the CapTech team and they'll get that to you. All right. Any other questions before we go?
There is one, Sharon, and I think it's one for you to answer in the Q&A.
Patrick, okay, so you do have a colorado.gov and you're wondering about whether to go to a different website. So you're welcome to do that if you want. But I will let you know that according to an independent survey, and I can't remember the name off the top of my head right now who did it, last November, they discovered that the colorado.gov websites are the most accessible in the country. So you can go to another platform, but ours is a pretty good one. So I'd recommend it staying. You can hire someone to work on your platform and fix any accessibility issues that are found with those automated and manual testing audits that are done. And they can help you fix those issues. You can contact our digital accessibility specialist, Josh Schroeder. He's on this call. His email is josh@colorado.gov. cosipa.gov, and ask him any questions that you may have as well, because we're here to help.
And I'll just add that from an operational standpoint, there's a lot of benefit to using the colorado.gov platform as well. You've got folks across the state that are all pursuing accessibility for their sites. That platform's getting remediated on a regular basis. And so you're benefiting from all of that work that's being done. And you can really focus on your content. Whereas working with an outside vendor, you'd sort of have to, work with that vendor to cover all aspects of the accessibility of your site.
Yes. Yes. And Fantasia, if you don't want the Colorado.gov website anymore, we would recommend that it gets decommissioned and take it down so that it's not up, and then gathering potential issues that become a liability. And then you would need to build it off on a different website platform. If you want someone else to do it, again, you just get security agreements for those people so they can become users. If you have any questions about accessibility issues on your .gov websites, get in touch with me, Sharon at cosipa.gov, or Josh at cosipa.gov. And then a question about the House Bill 25-1152 and any new rules. Do you guys have anything you want to add about that? Because I know we just had that rulemaking session this past week, and OIT's working on getting out some new rules for that.
Yeah, I think, just to be very brief there, I think those new rules are a lot about clarifying some of the things that we talked about here, clarifying, how you handle archived content, how you handle, third-party content, and just clarifying what that means and what those responsibilities are. I don't think, anything in that guidance is going to fundamentally change what's coming out here. It's just sort of making it more concrete. In general, I think an important kind of broader perspective to keep on all of this is that, these rules and statutes are going to, continue to evolve and change over time. New requirements are going to get added. Really, I think the goal of every organization should be to kind of stay one step ahead of those, aim for, as Virginia talked about, an experience that is as inclusive as possible, not just stopping at meeting standards that are currently required today. And then you'll be in a really good place to be, like I said, one step ahead, and not kind of worrying about what the new update is or what the new standards are requiring.
Well put. All right. Well, since we are over time and looks like we've got most of our questions answered, we'll go ahead and let you all go the rest of the day and enjoy it. Thank you again for joining us. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us or anyone on the CapTech team if you have any questions, you want to learn more, you want to get quotes. We're here to help. Please save the date for our upcoming webinars. We're going to do a SIPA overview again on April 16th. And then on April 30th, we're going to have Ruben Brown in doing Anatomy of a Breach, lessons from real world cybersecurity attacks. And then we'll have hopefully another one in May before we take the summer off. In the meantime, please check out our newly redesigned website at sipa.colorado.gov for anything that you may need from us. Subscribe to our monthly newsletter to keep up with events, because we should also have a microgrant opening up here soon. And then contact us if we can help you with anything. We'll get this up on a YouTube channel as soon as we can, and then you can watch it again or share it with anyone else. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to the CapTech team for this wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.